Alright, welcome to our virtual art class. Today we're going to be talking about how to draw anime or cartoons, just going over the basics real quick. So, most of the time if you're drawing anime or cartoons, proportions and colors, they're going to be exaggerated, either more or less. So we're just going to start real quick with basic human proportions up here in the corner. So your basic human proportions. Kind of look like this. Okay. The unit of measurement we usually use is called a head when we're drawing figures, and that's because a standard figure is about 7 to 8 heads tall. And there are different things in proportion on a human skeleton that measure about 1 head, which is obviously your head, the proportion of your arm from your elbow to your wrist, typically the width of shoulder to shoulder, usually a head, maybe a head and a half. Your foot, the length of a foot. So if you're looking at a foot this way, these being your toes, and this being what goes up into your leg. Okay, there's a very basic foot. It's about 1 head from the back of the ankle to the front of the toes. Now, when you're drawing cartoons or anime, you exaggerate these proportions. So you might have, you know, a much larger head to body ratio. Your body might be a little stunted. But the important thing is, you know which features are going to be exaggerated. Everything on the head, hair, eyes, nose, mouth, ears, it's all going to be exaggerated in different ways. Now, this is more of like a chibi style. If you were going to go for a more elongated style, everything would, you would keep the same basic proportions when it comes top to bottom, but you know, you would skinny up the shoulders, the rib cage would get smaller, the hips would be much smaller. You might elongate some of the limbs if you're going for a skinnier sort of look. But you would keep most of the basic top to bottom proportions the same. Now when you're drawing animated faces, anime or cartoon faces, you know, your basic head shape is going to be a sphere plus a prism, because that is how your jaw works. Now in perspective, your chin's gonna end up, you know, being down here a little bit. But for the most part, standard proportions, your eyes are going to be about halfway, your hairline is going to be about halfway between the eyes and the top of the head, the ears are going to connect where the eye line connects, and connect on the bottom about where the bottom of the nose is. And then your lips are going to be down here. Now, for animated options, you might have a more bulbous skull shape, a smoother jaw like this. Your eyes would still kind of be at the bottom of that, but they might be nice and big. You might have a little button nose, little mouth. So for much more cartoony proportions, you usually pick one feature and you make it nice and big compared to the rest of everything. So, big cartoony head. If you wanted to do a more realistic cartoon head, you would keep your basic proportions, but you might exaggerate some features of the face. This head I'm drawing has a very pointy chin. Give him a pointy chin and a big forehead. So you're going to keep some of the same features. And you would keep the same general look. You could exaggerate them a little less intensely than you might for a more chibi style look. But you can tell there are very few people with this head shape, and most of them are cartoons. So we have a nice the more realistic animated or cartoon look to it. You might make the neck a little skinnier, because typically too the neck on a standard head connects kind of up here behind the jaw with the ears. It's almost the same width as the head. So on cartoons, you do a little bit of a skinnier neck, typically. There you go. So the biggest thing for making something look cartoony is just exaggerate the proportions in some way. Either make them really big, make them really small. You could have a cartoon head that is huge compared to the body. You could have the more regular proportions, just make everything much skinnier, side to side. But overall, keep the general feel of it being a person, if that's what you're drawing. Cartoons and animation also have very heavy line work, typically, especially the more exaggerated. So if I was to do something like that, I would want, instead of more shading, because the shading is typically more flat on an animated or cartoon head, and they use thick, heavy line work. To tell you where things are at. So if I'm making a little chibi type anime head, I'm going to be using much thicker lines, much more heavy-handed. Cute little button nose here. They also tend to have more simplified features. If I'm going for a more realistic cartoon look, I'm going to use more shading versus lines to get the idea across. I'll also give it a little more detail. So same face, just two different styles. Much more realistic proportions, a little more shading, very flat, very heavy line work. And that is going to be some of your cartoon and anime basics. And now, real quick, we're just going to go through and I'm going to draw an entire figure in a animated type style. So you can see what more than just the face would look like. Alright, so for this, it's a more realistic style. I just lengthened all my proportions. Her arms aren't exactly even, but that's okay. You know, kind of thinned it out a little bit. If I was to go in the exact opposite direction and widen all the proportions instead, it might look like this. So again, it doesn't matter which proportions you choose to exaggerate, just stay consistent throughout, and you'll have a more cartoony or anime drawing.